All right. So we are continuing on today in our series called God Leading. And last week we took a little bit to talk about the idea of identity, and we looked at how oftentimes we can find ourselves in an identity crisis because we seem to lack security. And when we lack that security, we begin to question who we really are, what we're really doing. And we looked at how if we would just search the scriptures out, if we would just look at the things that God says about us, we would find that our identity rests there and that we have all of the security that we need in God. Okay, so if you didn't get a chance to hear that message, I invite you to go back to the website, take a listen to that, and see if that's helpful for you. Today we're going to continue to talk about how God leads us, and we're going to look at chapters 18 and 19 in Genesis, again continuing with the story of Abraham and how God is leading Abraham in his life and through these different promises that God has given him. And so today, one of the questions we're going to look at, or one of the ways that God leads Abraham, is again through this theme of hospitality. Okay, so we're going to look at that through the lens of Abraham today. And so as we start, as we normally do, I have some opening reflections for you to think about and consider, to put in the back of your mind as we work through some of this today. The first is, what does hospitality mean to you? You think about that word, what kind of things does it generate in your mind? How do you do it? And again, I think this is an important question because I don't believe that there's one set way that we do hospitality. Again, each of us has a set of gifts and a set of ways of doing things that allow us to express hospitality in different ways. And finally, what have you learned about yourself and about others through practicing hospitality? So let's begin this morning then by picking up right at the beginning of chapter 18. And we find Abraham kind of taking a little siesta in the middle of the day. It's hot. And all of a sudden he looks out from his tent and he sees these three guys, these three strangers standing a little ways off from his camp. Now again, we remember that Abraham is living in a clan-like or a tribe-like structure. And so I envision they kind of have their little dwellings out around this great tree, and they're laying there, and all of a sudden out in the distance there are these three strangers, and they're just kind of standing there wondering, is it safe for us to approach this group of people? Would we be safe? Will they take care of us? Or will they seek to harm us, take our stuff, and whatever? But look at Abraham's response. And so again, Abraham is the leader of this tribe. He could have gotten up and said, you know what, you servant, go out and bring those people in and let's see what they want. But no, him as the patriarch, as the leader of this clan or this tribe, gets up and he runs out to meet these people. And he treats them with a great deference and a great amount of respect. Okay? He saw them and he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them, and he bowed low to the ground. And one of the things that we have to, I think, be very aware of when it comes to hospitality is, are we truly seeing people? Okay? Too often we race through this life trying to do all of the things that we have lined up in our busy days, and oftentimes we just walk right by people like they don't even exist. And the start of hospitality is seeing people, seeing them for who they truly are. Okay? What does it look like when you're at the grocery store and someone's checking you out to just pay attention to that person in line, that clerk, and just say, hey, how's your day going? Thank you for taking the time to do this for me. What does it look like to open the door for a person when you're going in the same building, or just even something simple as a smile, just allowing that person to recognize that you noticed them in their day. Again, hospitality can look a lot of different ways, but it begins with kind of taking the blinders off or getting out of that tunnel vision and just seeing the world and the people around us. Now, hospitality also requires something of us, okay? And as we look at the story of Abraham, we see that Abraham, brings these people in. He immediately wants to care for them. He says, please come in, let me get some water for you that you can wash your feet and clean up. Let me make some food for you. And these three guys say, yep, sure, if that's what you want to do, we appreciate that. Now, look what Abraham does. Abraham goes and gets his finest thing, some of the finest things that he has. He runs in the tent and says, you know what, Sarah, I need you to get 3 of the finest portions of flour that you can and make some nice loaves of bread for these people. And he goes out to the field and he gets a choice calf for them and brings them in. He doesn't just give them his leftovers. You know, today, oftentimes, many of us, myself included, think we're doing some great cause or that we're really generous when we give some of our old clothes away. All right? You know, if it doesn't fit me or it's all ruined and I'm not going to wear it anymore, I'll just give it away and then I can feel good about that. But it's totally different when I see someone standing here that actually needs my shirt. Am I really going to take this off right here and now and give that shirt to that person because that's the need that's there? And so Scripture calls us, when we do hospitality, not to just do it halfway, but to do it the best that we can in the places that we can. Now the other point I thought very interesting is that after having prepared all of this, Abraham just stands there while they eat. As the host, he stands there. I mean, he's the patriarch, he's the leader of this, and yet he's showing deference to them that while they eat, he stands there and he waits for them. He cares for them. So let's dig into this a little bit more, and let's look at just a few of the many examples of biblical hospitality and think about this theology we have around hospitality. So if we look at Leviticus 19, we see that in the law, it's required that by law, the Israelites are required to treat strangers, to treat sojourners as one of their own. Okay, so that when people come in, they're protected, they're accepted. We don't treat them, it's not an us or they, but it's a we. Okay? In Matthew 25, again, this has some end times meaning in this parable, but also it's a beautiful example of hospitality because Jesus says, you know what, when I was hungry, when I was thirsty, when I was a stranger, you fed me, you gave me something to drink, you brought me in and cared for me. Hebrews 13:2, which is very poignant to these very scriptures that we're looking at today, says, sometimes by entertaining strangers, we have entertained angels. And we'll unpack that a little bit more. But all throughout Scripture, there's this beautiful example of what hospitality is and how we are to do these things. Again, we would remember that the Israelites themselves were sojourners for a long time. It's not long after Abraham, a few generations, and they find themselves in Egypt. They find themselves wandering through the desert for 40 years as strangers in this land. We see Jesus, after his birth, leaving his place to go and be a stranger in the land of Egypt as basically seeking asylum, scared for his life. Okay, well, he was 2, he probably didn't know too much or whatever, but his parents did. And so they took him down there, and then finally he comes back. So scriptures are filled with an example of not only treating strangers well and treating them with hospitality, but remembering the experience of being strangers themselves. So what is hospitality and how we do it? Again, the first thing we need to do is we need to see people. Okay? And oftentimes, this includes and is sometimes really focused on seeing people in the margins. Okay? Because these are the people that hospitality is really designed to do. I believe all hospitality is really based on this sense of dignity, that you look at this other person and say, you know what, doesn't matter where you came from, what the color of your skin, what your gender is, whatever else is different about you, but it's the fact that you're a human being and God made you someone special. Okay, and when I treat you with dignity, that's a form of hospitality. Now the other part is that we come and we stand with and we care for those people around us. Okay? And that is very different than just throwing a few, like I said, a few leftovers, saying, well, here, I hope this helps. It's very different when we come and stand with those people that need that attention, that need that help, and say, you know what, I'm here for you. Let's walk this path together. If you're hungry, let's seriously get some food. But maybe it's not just, maybe in some cases it's a meal. Maybe at other times it's more than a meal. Maybe it's taking that person someplace else, walking down that road to help them find a sustainability for themselves. So, again, what is it and how do we do it? Now, again, I'm going to get a little controversial here today and say that in many ways, I think some of us get locked in a box of how we think hospitality should look. Okay? We just get set in, you know what, at church hospitality looks like being greeted, saying hello during passing the peace, and a little bit of fellowship time. But that's not all that there is to hospitality. Okay? To me, the church also needs to do that, but it also needs to be going out those doors and showing hospitality to the world around us. When new people come into our community, what does it look like for us to embrace them? When new people come into this church, what does it look like for us to embrace them and say, hey, we're truly glad that you're here? Now, again, when it comes to hospitality, I think many of the issue on the back of your mind, especially as we've gone through some of these scriptures, the poignant issue of today is the issue of immigration and how we deal with that. Do we just allow people to come in unchecked and just do whatever they want, or do we set up this these levels of restrictions and try to prevent as few people coming in as we can? And the thing I was really thinking about and sort of convicted about this week is that, well, immigration is one of those issues for us. Immigration really isn't the issue. Okay? It really depends on the way that we're looking at it, the way that we're coming about seeking change in these specific areas. It's based on our perceptions of how we believe we do hospitality. And I'll say right now, and I think many of you would agree, that we find ourselves in these very polar opposites about how we think we should affect change in these areas. Okay? So, let's look at some of the kind of political stances so we can begin to understand each other in terms of how we view social change. Because if we don't understand that, we're just going to continue to be locked together in these fights. And if we're ever going to truly solve or work on some of these issues, I really believe we need to come off of these extremes and come back together in unity as a people. All right? So on the conservative end, for people on the right, and again, this is a generalization, people on the right tend to look at change through personal moral change. So for them, social change comes by first looking at the person, looking at that person's morality, and changing at a heart level. And so they start out very small. With myself, I'm going to look at how I do hospitality, and as I learn and grow in hospitality, so I'll share it and advocate it with others, and it will have this bottom-up approach, all right? People on the left, again, because of our extreme, appear to be almost the exact opposite, all right? And so when they look at social change, it's from a top-down. So rather than looking at themselves first, they say, you know what? As I look out at society, I see these problems. I see racism. I see xenophobia. I see this. And I want to change these things, so I'm going to start up here and eventually come down. All right? And I think if we don't understand those things, we're going to be in trouble. And personally, I don't think that either one of them, when they're at the extremes, serves people in hospitality. Okay? So you can legislate over here on the left. You can legislate all the laws that you want, but if people's hearts don't change, you're not going to have lasting and meaningful change. All right? And if you're over here on the right, and you never move beyond yourself and the way the things that you're supposed to do, if you never move beyond and encourage other people to embrace hospitality and things are never going to change. And so we need to begin to move together. And folks, I'm going to say that we're going to live in this tension. And these may not be issues that are just completely solved, but we're called to live in this tension that pulls us and stretches us in ways. And if you look at how Methodism was set up, there's constant tension in so many of the areas, and it's put there on purpose. All right? This tension that pulls us and makes us grow. Now again, I would encourage us to look at things from both points of view. So, how do we look at hospitality from ourselves? How do I need to change my heart to see people, to treat people with dignity, and how do I continually strive to do hospitality better? Again, as a church, how do we do hospitality as a church? How do we welcome the people that will come and sit in these chairs and in these pews and treat them as a family member? In both of these churches, that's one of the things I hear about all of the time from people who have come in, is that this church just feels like a family. All right? And that's a beautiful thing. We need to keep doing that. So please don't hear me say we're doing it wrong. We're doing this right, but how can we continue to grow into this? How can we continue to move out of our comfort zone so that we not only do hospitality good here, but we're going out, as I said, to be the church outside of these walls? How do we show hospitality to our community? Okay? We're a pretty homogenous community. Okay? Most of us are white. Alright? Male and female, we're white. But it doesn't take us long to notice people of different orientation, different skin color or whatever. How must they feel to be in this homogenous type of a community? How can we welcome them into our community to help them acclimate and get on their feet, to settle in and to contribute in a meaningful way, the way that they're equipped to do? And then again, how do we take this top approach? How do we show hospitality as a nation? How do we treat the people that want to come here? All right? And again, I'll be the first to admit that as someone who is generally of a conservative nature, that our immigration system is not the greatest system. I totally believe that nations have the right to secure their borders, but sometimes the United States cherry picks the people they want. Okay? And oftentimes we take the best and the brightest from these other countries, and I think we do them a real disservice sometimes by saying, you know, we're going to let you come in because you're a doctor, but we're not going to let you come in from over here because you're just a normal worker. Okay? And so we hurt the countries sometimes that we do that. Now, on the other hand, I don't believe that we just allow people to run in here unchecked to do that, because our government has the obligation to protect us. All right? And so people need to come in through the places and the ways that they do it. Now, should they have a million restrictions on trying to apply for citizenship and all of these things that they have to do? No, not necessarily. There should be a few, because again, as we'll look in just a minute, hospitality has some reciprocity to it. Okay? So when Abraham goes out and brings these strangers in, there are customs in place that says, look, I'm caring for you, but you don't get to abuse my hospitality. You don't get to treat my family and my things in an unpleasant way. All right? And so we have to remember that as we go forward. And again, I don't claim to have all of the solutions here this morning, but I hope, especially in this election year, that as we look and work through topics, that as a church, despite our political leanings, that we open up and have dialogue with each other. Because that's how things are going to begin to change, and how we begin to work with each other to do hospitality in the best way that we can. So let's just branch off here for a little bit and go further with our story. And we see the visitors kind of enjoying their meal, and all of a sudden one of them says, you know, well, where is Sarah? And Sarah is hiding in the tent, and he says, well, you know, by this time next year when I come back, Sarah's going to be pregnant and you're going to have a child. And so it's interesting, Sarah's response, because I think like most of us, her response is pretty normal. Okay? She kind of looks at herself, this 90-year-old woman, and goes, I'm going to have a kid? Yeah, right. All right, now my wife, she's not here so I can pick on her. You know, she's not even 40 years old, but the thought of having another kid just about sends her through the roof. So I poke her every once in a while and say, oh, maybe we should go for number 4. It just flares right up. All right, so can you imagine poor Sarah here at 90 years old saying, you know what, I've wanted a kid all of my life, and now Abraham tells me God told him that I'm going to have a kid. But the interesting thing about it is, I think we can relate to this, but again, the first place Sarah goes is to her own strength. She looks at her body, she looks at her ability to do things and says, you know what, I just don't know at this point in life if I'm equipped to handle this. I just don't really know. I tried my whole life to get pregnant and I couldn't do it. How do I know this is really true? The other point I would bring out about this, especially in churches that are aging, is that folks, and again, this goes for, I think, specifically the older generation and the younger generation, is that oftentimes you feel like you don't have a use anymore. You think your time has run out, or you think you're too young to do stuff, and folks, Sarah's 9 years old and she's going to have a kid. God is going to fulfill His promises. And I'm going to tell each one of you, whether your hair is as white as the snow or you're just growing hair, God has a plan for you. God has stuff that He has designed you to do. And folks, never think that you're beyond that point or that you're too young to make a difference here in this church or in this community. Okay? Now the other thing as we go back to hospitality is we look again at this sort of reciprocity that goes on here. And so while Abraham is treating these strangers to some of their needs, some of their food and dietary things, I view these next few scriptures as sort of reciprocity because they begin to pour back into the life, especially Sarah here, because the angels, in this case we learn later that they're angels, say to them, you know what, Sarah, you are going to have a child. I promised you this. I promised you and Abraham this when you left, that you would be a person of great status, that you would have this land that you would call your own, and that you would be a father and a mother to these nations that would come out of you. And folks, sometimes when it comes to hospitality, we like to be on the giving end a lot of the times, but sometimes we have a really hard time receiving. And sometimes I think we do a real disservice to those people that, out of whatever capacity they have, try to give to us, and we say, oh, no, I don't want to do that, because we don't want to be obligated to have to give something back. Or we become too proud to accept that. And sometimes we don't allow people to step into their gifts and to allow God to work through them because we say, oh, no, I don't need that, I don't want that. I was watching a video this week as I was preparing this message, and it almost brought me to tears. It had this father and this young girl, and they're in a store, and they have a few items, and they get up to the line, and you can just see this sense of worry on the dad's face. And the cashier rings up all of the stuff, and it comes to a certain amount of money, and he doesn't have the money to pay for all of the groceries that he had there. He only has about half of the money that he needs. And so you watch him kind of, as his heart breaks and his spirit deflates, tell the cashier, well, put this back. And in those grocery items was a cake, a special item, this cake that they wanted to get for his dad and this girl's grandpa, and because their grandpa was really struggling. And unfortunately, he just doesn't have enough money for this quote-unquote luxury item, and so he's forced to put it back. And you just see this man's spirit deflate, and he walks out of the store, and a few minutes later, one of the other people in the store comes running out with a bag and says, you know what, here, I wanted to give this to you. And it's all of the items he couldn't afford, okay? And this dad is just blown away because, again, that cake is in there and some of the items that he needed. He just says, well, why would you ever do this for me? You know, I don't even know you. And this guy goes on to say, you know what, when I was a young boy, my mom and I were homeless, and we were in your exact same situation. And we didn't have enough money to even get our next meal. And some guy did this for us. And he gave me this note, and then all it said was, pay it forward. And so I'm just paying it forward, and he gave him the note. And so they go on, and they're able to celebrate their dad's or their grandpa's birthday. And even he is in just a rough spot. He's sitting there in his home, just kind of contemplating his life. He's fallen on hard times, and he says, you know, I don't know if my life had any purpose. I don't know if my life had any meaning, if my life really mattered to anyone at all. And he kind of looks at the son and says, well, how were you able to afford to get all these things? I know you two have been struggling a little bit, and so the dad and the girl quick tell this amazing story about how this gentleman in the store had given them the items they need and how they were so excited that they could come and celebrate them. And so they give him the slip of paper that said, pay it forward. And ironically, his memory goes back, and he's actually, the grandfather was actually the one that did it first for the young boy who was homeless. And so things had come full circle in a way. And so folks, we never know how one simple act of hospitality, no matter how big or how small, may just reap huge dividends, not only for that person, but for us. Because again, there's an old saying in business, you don't kick people up on the way up because you never know who's going to be there going up past you when you're coming down. Okay, so folks, again, think about that. One random act. And again, I want to be very clear. We don't do hospitality so that we get stuff. Okay? That's not the reason for hospitality. But I do believe God does reward us when our hearts are sincere. And there are times in all of our lives where we're the ones that need to be on the receiving end because we're the ones on hard times. And so Sarah struggles to accept and receive. And this angel has to get a little stern with her and say, hey, snap out of it. Abraham told you you're going to have a kid. And God told Abraham, so you better start believing it because when I come back here next year, you're going to have a son. All right? Now the rest of this chapter and much of chapter 19 seem very odd to our modern minds. Okay? And so what we see here now is the hospitality in a way has the initial act of hospitality has passed, and the angels and Abraham walk over to this hill and they look down upon the city of Sodom. And for those of you that know the story, the city of Sodom is basically Sin City. Okay? And God has heard the cries and anguish of the people that have been mistreated by this city. And so he goes out and he debates almost whether he should tell Abraham what he has in store for it. And his plan is to destroy the city because of its wickedness, because of its evilness. Now again, our modern minds have a very difficult concept, or a very difficult time understanding the concept of God destroying people. Okay? But we do have to remember that God is perfectly holy. There is no wickedness. There is no evil in him. Our God is a just and righteous God. Our God is also loving. And that's very hard for our finite minds to put those two pieces together a lot of the time. But he invites Abraham into this discussion. In a way, I see this as God almost testing Abraham to see how Abraham has grown in his relationship with God. And so he says, you know what, Abraham, because of the cry of the people against this city, I think I'm going to destroy it. And Abraham begins to plead with God, saying, you know what? What if there were 50 people that were righteous in this town? If you could find 50 people, would you avert your wrath? And God says, yep, I guess if there were 50 people. And Abraham goes all the way down. It's just, for literally verses and verses, Abraham goes down in this kind of conversation with God until he gets down and says, you know what, God, if there were just 10 righteous people, would you avert your wrath against the city of Sodom? And God says, you know what, if I find 10 righteous people, I'll do that for you. Okay? And the thing that is so interesting in this is because it shows, again, Abraham's changed heart, that Abraham sees himself as a leader of this land, and even this city that is wicked and that Abraham knows is there, he has God's heart to say, you know what, these still are your people, God. You created them. And if there's at least 10 righteous people, will you save the people down there? We don't just see him saying, you know what, God, my nephew is down there and I really want you to save Lot and get him the heck out of there. The rest of people I can care less about, but I need my nephew Lot and his family. No, God's heart, or Abraham's heart, is for all of the people. I don't have time to go into it a lot today, but if you remember that Hebrews 13 verse that I talked about and how it's very poignant to these next few chapters, we will look that eventually the two angels that are with God go down into the city of Sodom. And they look at the city and they test the city. And what happens? They go to Lot's house, who again is Abraham's nephew, and immediately the community that's supposed to welcome them, to show them hospitality, to treat them well, seeks to abuse them in horrific ways. Okay? And we see even the difference in Lot's expectation of hospitality versus Abraham's expectation of hospitality. And we find that again, Lot succumbs to even some very questionable moral things, because he says, these angels, rather than giving the angels to go out and be abused by the people, he says, you know what, why don't you just take my family members? Why don't you just do that? And again, the role of the host is to protect his people. Okay? So again, we see these stark contrasts between the hospitality of Abraham and the hospitality of Sodom and even Lot. And so I will invite you to read the rest of that scripture again. Chapter 19 is one of those very difficult chapters that we have in the Bible. We read it and we just go, I don't get this. This doesn't make any sense to me. But I hope some of this has kind of prepared you to look at and understand part of that. So as I leave you today, I would encourage you to continue to reflect on your understanding and experience of hospitality. How do you do it? Again, each one of us will probably show hospitality in a different way according to the gifts that God has given us. And that's not right or wrong. That's the way God has called us to do it. But again, how can we grow? How can we continually move out of our comfort zones so that we don't get locked in thinking that it needs to look this way all the time? How can our churches show greater hospitality this year? Again, how do we do it here? How do we keep getting better as we do hospitality here? But what does it look like for us to be out in the community as a church, to be the body beyond the walls? And so I invite you, please, tell me your ideas. I'd love to hear them, love to hear what you would like to do. And again, I would encourage you, show hospitality to one or more people this week. Again, something as simple as a hello, a smile. Maybe it is that you buy somebody's groceries in a line. Again, there is no limit to what can be done for hospitality. I just invite you to share that with the people around you. God bless.